Okay. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was great. Thank you all for coming and choosing this session, because I nearly didn't choose this session. There was like 2 other things I wanted to see, and they're both on at the same time. So thanks for picking me, I guess. And on that note, my watch just died, so we might be here all day, folks. I don't know how long I'm going to talk on for now. But yeah, we're going to talk about responsible AI. It's just a chat. There's not much more to it. It's something we should be talking about a lot more. I mean, y'all look like lovely people. I'm sure at the back of your brains, you're not kind of going out there to ruin the world, I hope. If someone is, come chat to me after. We can have a discussion about that. But yeah, this is kind of just bringing up topics that we should be talking about a lot more to the forefront a bit. So let's dive in. A little bit about me. I'm the most flamboyant Irish photo of me that exists. I think I just start with this one everywhere now. This has stayed this way for 5 years. It's a very old photo. But yeah, my name's Akanksha. I live in Melbourne. I'm a data consultant here. I'm also a Microsoft AI MVP, as Jeffrey introduced me with. But yeah, I do a lot of stuff around this. And last week in Sydney, someone gave me a new title and they said, AI therapist. So if you've got sorrows you want to share about data and AI, come talk to me. We'll have a good little chat. I can empathize. But yeah, before we kind of dive too far, a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm no expert, as much as we like to say, and I'm not going to do that again. That was very loud. But I'm no expert in kind of ethics, right? I don't have philosophy degrees. I am just very enthusiastic about this whole thing that's happening. New things keep happening, new mistakes keep getting made, and we should be talking about them a bit more because they do harm people. So that's where I'm coming at this from. This really is meant for hey, this is a discussion, and I would like people's opinions afterwards. And you might have very different opinions about this because, again, it's ethics. There is no right or wrong answers. So yeah, just a quiet disclaimer ahead of this. Has anyone heard about this thing? Yeah? No? Oh, it was a good lapse. Okay, great. Joke number 1, sorted. It just kind of took over the world in the last couple of months. Everyone wants it. Everyone wants to talk about it. And then slightly separately, OpenAI, some people also talk about that one. But mostly people just call it ChatGPT. That's the big one. Most of you here are people who, practitioners of data, so you probably actually know OpenAI and you've dealt with the words LLMs and stuff before. But the market really has just exploded with generative AI. This is just the biggest buzzword out there at the moment. I think a couple of years ago, if people remember, it was ML, that other thing. People really wanted that everywhere. At one stage, it was bots. People were obsessed with bots, like conversational bots. Put it into everything, right? And we tend to go through these kind of ups and downs of we are obsessed with this tech. It's new and it's flashy and we want it. So just in terms of bringing this back to front, we do still want this other thing. It's probably the most common thing that is actually in place in a lot of businesses. Generative AI is still pretty new and people love it. But just a very quick reminder, generative AI isn't really creating anything new. It's not coming for your jobs because it just merges and takes bits and pieces from everything it has ever seen and creates something new. Not actually new. It's just, here's a different way of looking at this. It's like building Lego blocks. Machine learning, again, is just very similar, but a little bit different, where it's like, hey, I've seen this pattern before. Here you go. It just pops that back straight up there. And so that was just to bring everyone to the same page. These are the main terms we're probably going to be talking about over the next little bit. So we're on the same page now. Take a minute. Instead of generative AI, used to be other words that we just talked about, chatbots, whatever you want to call it. They keep doing this. And they keep forgetting about everything else you need to get there. But no, just jump to the other end. Just give it to us. Just make it happen already, please. But I think times are changing a little bit because we are actually starting to talk a lot more about this. People are getting engaged a little bit more because ChatGPT exploded at such a big rate that so many other people started using it and they kept seeing the mistakes with it, right? It started lying to people. It started hallucinating. So people were like, wait, why is it doing that? That became a conversation point. So we're going to talk a lot more about it for the next whatever many minutes I have left. So AI, this is a big white screen because we're going to talk about the problems of it to grab your attention. It can go wrong really, really easily. And there's a lot of examples over the last couple of years when Amazon's AI recruiting tool showed bias against women. So that was clearly where the data just hadn't been fully looked at. Basically, they just trained on, hey, these are all the past successful applications. Now let's just make it AI do it instead of a human, which had biases built into it. So we can see examples of this already in the industry. An AI camera mistook a player's bald head for a ball. So it kept tracking someone's head instead of the actual ball for a whole baseball game. That happened. Microsoft's AI chatbot turned very sexist and very racist within 24 hours because it was trained to take the input and understand that and basically regurgitate that back out to humans. So there wasn't enough safety guardrails built into that premise of like, hey, we should look at what people tell us and maybe don't take everything as a source of truth. Not every piece of data is good and we should be considering it. And also the fact that false facial recognition can lead to false arrests. So these things we kind of have heard about in the past. These are very common sample cases of when data goes wrong. This is usually, most of these are based on the data itself, whether there's not enough data set, images and training scenarios, or whether there is, but the data itself is just very biased. There's also things like this. How many times have we heard about The Simpsons predicting every future exhibit, right? There's been about 30 odd instances of that actually happening out of, I think it's at about 800 episodes. So the people who believe in this, I'm like, that's a 4% accuracy rate. Don't know what's going on with that one, but I wouldn't be placing any bets on Simpsons predicting the future. What's actually happening is there's really, really smart people writing The Simpsons. They can look around the world and be like, that would be kind of funny if that happened, and people are stupid enough to do that, so that could happen, put it in. That's essentially what's happening, which is very similar to what ChatGPT and LLMs and all these kind of things do. They see everything that's happening, and that could be a reality. So this is, again, another example of predictions can go wrong just based on how you show it back to the user. So ChatGPT, we've all seen the hallucinations and stuff, right? This is basically just picking up patterns that exist. There's a lot of words going on. I tend not to have a lot of words on my thing. Please don't try and read it. There's a lot of words. I'll just call out the important parts. But I asked it to give me kind of tutorials. I asked for books. I never read books. I don't know why I did that. So I was like, give me tutorials instead. I can watch videos. And what it did was it gave me a couple of links, right? There's 3, LinkedIn, Udemy, Medium. Like, perfect. This is exactly what I wanted. I clicked into those links and not a single one of them exists because it got very good at being like, okay, this person's looking for tutorials and on consulting. Most of this content exists on LinkedIn or Udemy, maybe even Medium. It basically just made up the rest of it. It's just pattern matching. It's not smart. There's no kind of brains behind this. It just knows that the next letter in this link should look like this. So again, data will lie to us. Models will lie to us. How do we actually counteract against that and make sure we can identify it when that happens is important. So all of that brings me to this topic. That was a very long-winded introduction to why we're talking about responsible AI. It is important because things go wrong really easily. So the main kind of pillars of responsible AI kind of fall into these 3 categories. There needs to be a value in what you're building, and it needs to be trusted. That the predictions it's going to make actually have some kind of impact and we can trust them and they'll be true. Fairness and explainability. The model isn't going to judge me and it's not going to just very weirdly discriminate against me, which is quite likely, realistically. I am a woman of color. Most data sets don't cater to me. And when I am being discriminated against, it should be able to explain why, right? It should be able to tell me why I'm coming up with this prediction. Oh, it's based on these reasonings. And within that, then, when it does discriminate against me, it needs to be able to be held accountable and it needs to be in line with all the compliance and regulations. That's kind of the main key pillars of responsible AI. So that's usually what we're talking about when we talk about responsible AI. So we're good? Everyone gets it? I'm done? We all know what we're going to do when we leave? No, because this means nothing to anybody, right? Like, there's just words. How does that actually go into practice? So how many of us are data scientists here or identify as data scientists? Terms and things don't really mean something. Great, at least one, perfect. Data engineers? Yeah, I expected that, fair. Data engineering conference. ML engineers. Oh, cool. Have I covered everyone in the room by saying that? Yeah? Okay. Usually in most businesses, there will be a data team, and it's usually a pretty small team. Quite often, it might just be a lone data scientist sitting in a room alone, trying to build out solutions and stuff. And I just want to take a couple of minutes here to just show you kind of everything they need to put into considerations when building a solution. There's a lot that goes into it, right? They have to kind of start fighting and fighting is the right word probably, against their organization for like, hey, give us some money so we can actually build a solution. And the business needs to kind of see, hey, what's the business value? Like, why are we going to do this? What's the reasoning? What's the risk levels? How do we match up and balance against that? Are there skills in the business? Like the data scientists on their own might build it. How are we going to maintain it? These are all the considerations that go into it from an organizational perspective. The customer, so the actual end user, the team has to look at, okay, the model I might build needs to be fair, and it has to have those ethics, and the end user needs to be comfortable using it. They need to trust in it. All these different things are going on when they're building the solution. So now we looked at organization, customer, but the actual society. So the values and ethics that we hold in Australia are going to be very different to another country. So we have to look at and make sure that the models we build here actually match up to what the standards we have set as our own society, right? So like, we don't want to be discriminated against based on the the color of our skin, that order, those words. But also the fact that, hey, we believe in sustainability, like climate change is real. We've seen it in Australia, it's happening. Are the things we're building actually worth using up the resources that it's using up? All those different considerations come into it. And the actual workspace, and once all of that's done, hey, the things we're building, do we have the right workspace built and set up for this? Is there enough controls in place to make sure that we build responsibly? Everything that we're going to put forward, all of that's going to be maintained. The rest of the business is going to get behind the models. Hey, we built a model and then no one ever looks at it again. We don't really want that. That is work that you've done and we want to be able to showcase it. So there's a lot going on for the poor data team to consider. How many people have considered all of the above before? Oh, yes, that means I'm here for a reason. There's a reason for this talk. And it's hard. You're not going to be able to maintain and look through every single different nuance and possible use case scenario that might ever happen. So this is kind of the reason why I talk about this stuff. It's like, hey, let's put this back all up to the front and maybe you go home and think about this and talk about it for the next week. And someone else can talk about responsible AI in 2 weeks' time and bring it back up again. So that's the whole context of this. There's a lot to be considered when building any uses. And then the impact of the uses of your data sets. They're really important. A single data set can have multiple different use cases. So if we take retail transaction data, Amazon, Woolies, whichever online shopping you want to be doing, it can very quickly personalize your product recommendations, right? If I've bought a toothbrush, it'll probably tell me I should buy toothpaste. I appreciate that. It's all in one place. I don't have to go look for it again. That's a use case I like. Accordingly, it can do demand forecasting. Hey, most people every 3 months tend to buy toothpaste because they run out. So when it comes to 3 months, it'll give me a reminder. I'm like, yes, I actually was running out. Perfect, it'll come back again. At the same time, that exact same data can also be used for terrible stuff like price discrimination. So if Amazon knows I need to buy toothpaste next week because I've run out, they can jack up the prices if they want it. That's not really that great for me, and I'm going to hate that use case, and I don't want my data being shared in that scenario. It's unfair to me. So just kind of wanted to highlight how quickly the same data set gets misused. Similarly, in banking, fraud detection, amazing. If I'm on holidays and someone else is using my account, please tell me. I don't want to be robbed immediately. Personalized financial advice, any little thing to bring down those interest rates, I will take it. Any little recommendation. They won't give it to me. I have to go hunt them down for it. But we're here for it. We want those things. Those are good. Alternatively, the biased credit scoring, that's not great. If they start looking through my transactions and they're like, hey, that's a lot of Uber Eats going on. We don't trust you with your money and we're going to jack up your interest rates. I'm going to hate that, and I don't want my data being used for that. So it really does come back down to, again, those different pillars that we talked about of how are we making sure the end customer is okay with it, and is it fair to them to be using our data in that scenario? That's just another example of data being used in a healthcare scenario. I can go on and on and on about these things, so I won't, but come talk to me after and we can discuss all the ways data can go wrong very quickly. But Microsoft and Azure have put forward kind of their guidelines of what you should do when considering responsible uses. You should identify the threat, measure them, like how big of a threat is this, what's going to be the impact, mitigate against it, and then operate. Like that's the QR code to a link to their page, which talks about it. I was very disappointed by it. That did not give me anything, right? How do I identify it? What do I do with it? How do I mitigate these things? That doesn't actually line up to any useful day-to-day activities for me to go ahead with. So that was predominantly the reasoning where I started this talk, where I was like, this makes no sense. What can I actually do? So some key practices. Looking at privacy, there's a lot of regulations out there, GDPR, I'm sure you've heard of that one. But there's a lot more new coming through, especially things like the AI Act. There's a lot of kind of regulations coming into play. Keep up to date. It's really hard. It's really boring. I can guarantee you it's annoyingly boring keeping up with these things, but it's incredibly important to make sure you're not kind of showing up in the headlines as the latest breach of privacy and data. I think I've just talked about that part, the governance part, where there's new regulations coming in. Detecting and mitigating bias. The easiest way to do that is by having diverse teams. Is that the easiest solution out there? No. But because finding people is hard, finding the right people for your team is hard, especially in the current market where there's just such a skills shortage, but at the same time, so many people moving around. How do you go about doing this within your business? There's going to have to be a different solution to this, because you're not going to be able to find a perfectly diverse team that reflects globally exactly what the whole world looks like. That's never going to happen. So how do you go about doing this? And then building with explainability. So whenever you build something, any predictions that come out of it, can you explain why? Can the bank explain to me why I'm only being allowed borrow an X number when a person right beside me with the exact same qualifications, exact same spending things, but there might just be one thing different and their spending limit's completely different. Why is that the case? Can you explain your differences? So what can you do right now? Like as in, what can you do when you go back to work tomorrow? What day is it? Thursday? Friday. Yeah, Friday afternoon. Perfect conversations for your team, right? Understand the impact that these things will have. So talking about the data sets and where they might go. The data quality, can you go through your data and identify what kind of data is it? Is there too much of one thing? Is there too little of one other thing? Should you be removing them or adding to that data set? Can you actually very succinctly tell me what is in your data set right now? And I think Kendra talked about this morning, where a lot of people forget about that part. A lot of people don't actually know what's in their data sets. And ask for transparency and explainability. So if you aren't in that team building out those solutions and models, go talk to them. I'm not saying go in there and be like, hey, I know what to do now because I've heard one talk about it. Please don't do that. You do not know much more than the people actually on the ground building it, but go talk to them. You can be that diverse group that they can have a conversation with and identify gaps that they might be facing. So the biggest one, I don't know if I can make it any bigger than this, to be honest. I don't think it'll fit on the slide. Do not move fast and break things. I think it's becoming a theme throughout this day. I know Kendra talked about it. I think Mickey talked about it a little bit earlier. Just take your time. There is no rush, no matter how much the leaders are talking about kind of, hey, we need to get through this. We need to get this flashy buzzword out there. Take your time. So the ask from today onwards, think about the base data, what's happening, what's in there, very easily be able to communicate that back to other team members. What exactly is your data made up of? Can you talk about it? Can you break it down into demographics? Is there too much or too little of something? Move very slowly. Honestly, I don't think I can say that enough throughout the session. Just move slowly. There's no need to move that fast. Designate an accountability champion. This is the biggest one, I think, if you're designating yourself or someone in your team to actually come in and say, hey, once a month, we're going to just talk about what are we building and why are we doing it, and kind of going back over the basis of responsible AI. What is at stake here? Have we looked at all the little gaps? Have we looked at all the different uses that this might go into? Ensure there's diverse humans involved in your building. And if your team isn't diverse, that's okay. You have an organization filled with people with different experiences. Have lunch and learns. Invite them to come talk to you. Invite them to come listen to how you're building. That is your diverse team right there if you want to maintain your confidentiality within a business. And continuously talk about this. So set up a recurring meetings, talk about this within your teams. It's really, really important, especially because you are the data teams, right? Like you should be talking about this with your team members. I know it's hard to communicate sometimes, and I know it's boring, but set up a coffee catch up every 2 or 3 weeks, every month, wherever works for you. Please just try. And my last ask, once people are finished taking photos of this slide, credit the people's work that you are using when discussing responsible AI. So I have not built this by myself. These are not all my original thoughts. I have credited them, and I'll share those out on LinkedIn after this. Sami Desprez in Belgium, I believe he is. He was the source of a lot of my content. He started talking about this as well. especially because women are being left out of the conversation. Women are getting erased from responsible AI and ethical conversations, and it's happening yet again, as it always tends to do, right? People build these things, and it's an interesting phenomenon of, hey, we built a really cool thing, and they won't talk about it, about the issues and dangers when they're building it. They will turn around and talk about them once it's been built, and they've left that organization. So to the people who've been calling this out for years, take the time to recognize them. That's actually a really fabulous article, which highlights throughout the years exactly the evolution that's taken place. So yeah, that's my biggest ask, I think. Just make sure you're sharing people's work as it happens. So thank you for listening. I think I'm on time. I don't know how I've done for time. 7 minutes. Okay, I ran through it for no reason. I saw a 2-minute marker and it was not 2 minutes. But that's actually perfect. If you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to go back through anything and have a discussion about it.
And please give a warm applause to Akanksha.